Welcome to another great edition of Money Truth Moments with our very own money whisperer, Judy Copenbarger. How are you, Judy?
I am well, Carlos. Good to see you. How are you this fine Tuesday morning?
I'm fantastic. I couldn't wait to get our show started because we've been on this just awesome journey of just teaching folks just about finances, everything that's related to their, not only their financial needs, but also how they look at things differently. And it's not so bad after all when you have somebody that can guide you like you. So all right, folks, but thank you for joining us this morning. If you're not following Judy, please do so at judycopenbarger.com. We're going to talk about our website. We're going to talk about some resources that are available for you guys. And we're going to let you in on a little secret that a lot of that stuff is free. So you need to make sure that you stay tuned so you can find out a little bit more about that. So Judy, we've been talking a lot about finances. We've been talking about specifically you've always mentioned the 5 pillars of finance, right? And I want to make sure that before we jump into another specific one, you kind of remind our new folks who are tuning in for the very first time what these 5 pillars are and what they're all about. So if you can just kind of touch on that, please.
Sure, absolutely. So when it comes to personal finance, small business, small ministry, there are a few things that matter. And every decision that you make, every choice that you make every day around money happens in at least one of the 5 pillars. And there are 2 pillars that are rather protective in nature. There are 2 pillars that are rather growth oriented in nature, and then one that's neutral. So the 2 protective pillars of finance are legal. That's going to be your wills and your trusts and your entities, like whether you're incorporated, what kind of a business structure you have. And it's going to be the insurances. So if something happens financially to your business or to your personal resources, can you be able to replace those and can have continuity and continue doing what you were doing? And so that's what insurance is for. It's about subrogation. So if you have a loss, your house burns down, they build you a new one. If you have crash your car, they're going to fix it for you or replace it. So the insurance is the second pillar of kind of the protection for small business and for personal, for your family. The neutral one is taxation. And some would say that's more of a protective one because when you plan well with tax, you can really keep a lot of the money that you actually earn. And then there are 2 pillars that are growth oriented. And one is the cash flows and reserves. So it's how the money moves in and out. And when you need cash, where it comes from, it has to do with leveraging as well. And then the final one is the traditional investments. And some investments are, the traditional stocks, bonds, mutual funds, your 401k holdings, things like that. But there's also business entities and real estate that sometimes people overlook as those investments. So those are your 5 pillars.
Excellent. And I know that we've already touched on the legal aspect of the very first pillars, the one you're talking about being protective, right? So I want to take us today down. You just mentioned cash flows, and I want to take us down that path and discuss some of this. I'm going to probably end up asking you maybe about some examples that you can give us of the, those horror stories that you hear that sometimes people think it's too late. But let's talk overall. What is cash flows? What is it reserves? What do we need to know about this to even get the conversation started?
Yeah, well, cash flow is basically your P&L. It's the money that comes in and the money goes out. Where your income comes from. Some households, it's like you have one paycheck. It comes from one source and it comes, on the 15th and the 1st of every month. Other people have money, several different flows of cash that come in. And then it has to do with your expenses. So there's all the expenses associated with running a business, but there's also regular expenses for regular people. And it's your household expenses. So it's your gas and utilities and your phone bill and your housing costs and insurances and things like that. So the money that comes in, the money goes out is your flow. And then the cash reserves is what you've got on hand. It's how you capitalize your business. It's the savings that you have for a rainy day or for when you need to replace your garbage disposal or you get a flat tire or a baseball goes through the window, right? So it's the money that you need to make life work for you. So that's what I mean by cash flow and reserves.
And you talked about the P&L. So folks, P&L is the profit and loss that we have sometimes for business and all that. And so let's take a moment. I just finished college. I got my first job. I'm starting out. what are some best practices that as a young person hitting the workforce that I should be thinking about my future?
I would say savings. And what's so nice about this season, we've come out of a couple really tough years for a lot of people where they depleted savings and they had a business that, didn't make it, or they, couldn't find work, or they weren't able to go to work because the conditions, they weren't allowed to go to work. So it's been really tough for some people. But every time we have a tough time, in this country at least, I'm not sure how it is globally. Every time we have a really tough time where people are just having to, you know, bootstrap it together, they think about money more and they become more aware and more conscious about the movements they're making. Savings goes up, retirement planning goes up, and people think, maybe I don't need to really spend that right now. Maybe I could wait, I could delay that gratification and wait and buy it later, or maybe I don't need it at all, right? Whatever the thing is, or the experience is. And so when we have a kind of a crisis, or we have some kind of an economic, you know, transition, people save more money. And that makes me so happy because we haven't done that well as a country for the most part the last 50 years. Our parents and grandparents, they had to save. They couldn't go to the bank and get a loan. They didn't have credit cards like we do now. They didn't have access to lines of credit. They had to have it in the cookie jar. And so people are doing that more statistically. I see that among my clients and people I'm sharing with. They're just saving a little more. Doesn't mean they're not living and they're not having experiences and they're not using their money, but they're thinking a little bit more about tomorrow, and that's always a good thing.
Talk about, since we're talking about our grandparents growing up. I mean, I remember the old stories about keeping the money in the mattress and all that, right? Anywhere you can find the cookie jar, something else that you would find, or but there's also now, because of the economy that we're in, people make a comment that they don't want to put money away in certain places because they keep thinking that cash is king, right? Everybody talks about cash is king. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, but everything in moderation, right? Everything in balance. So it's really sad when I come across people that will not invest their money. They save their money really well, but it's not growing. And of course, at savings, if you've noticed in your passbook, or if you notice what the interest rates are, they have not been very favorable for saving. They've just been very low. It's good if you're loaning your money, right? Maybe, but it's really not that great, when you're trying to get some income. So, with interest rates low, not so favorable. So, rather than saving, once you have that cash reserve that you need, maybe 3 months of basic expenses, whatever that amount is. If you know there's a major expense coming up, you need to replace your refrigerator, or you're going to take a trip or something, you want to have more, obviously, in savings. And if you're single, you might want to have more than 3 months. You might want to have 4 or 5 months of basic expenses just tucked away for just in case something happens. But beyond that, that money should be working. Put Mr. Money to work. It's kind of like you have an empty bedroom down the hallway and Mr. Money lives there, right? He's got a big M on the front of his shirt. And like a lumberjack, he goes to work every day. And he's out there chopping wood and putting some of the wood in your backyard. Some of the wood goes, to another source. But that wood that he brings home, when he chops the wood down and puts it in your yard and stacks it up and saves that for you, he's actually working and he's doing things you can't do every day because you're doing what you do. So put him to work. Don't lock him back there in the back bedroom. Get Mr. Money working. It's a matter of balance for how much should be working and how much should be your savings and reserves. That's the trick. And that's where some planning can really help people.
Awesome, folks, and thank you for joining us. We are talking about Mr. Money, but we'll explain to you even more what that means a little later. Thank you for joining us this morning. If you're now following Judy, please do so at judycopenbarger.com. We're going to talk about our website here shortly, and you can find out a little bit more of the resources available. Today, we're definitely talking about cash flows and reserves, and there's quite a bit of questions that we can ask, and I want to make sure that we cover as much as we can while we have this time. So we're talking about Mr. Money, right? We're talking about the cash flow. We're talking about reserves, and all of this has to take place by planning, right? And for example, one of the things that you've brought up before too is really sitting down and discussing with your family, your spouse, your significant other, even if you're like we just talked about starting out, in the real world. Let's talk the very bad word budgets, right? Because I think you have to take a look at that sometimes to realize just what you're spending, what you're shelling out, and what's coming in. So you want to talk about best practices and maybe a little bit of horror stories you've come across?
Oh, the horror stories, the mistakes other people made that we can
Yeah.
learn from, right? So we don't have to. Yeah, budget for me, it's kind of a bad word. It's the B word, right? What I really prefer is spending plan. It's kind of like a diet. It's what you can't have, what you can't spend, right?
Yep.
But if you have an eating plan, it's like, well, that's what I get to have. I get to have vegetables and I get to have good, healthy things. It's not what I can't have. So spending plan, same thing. It's just a matter of having allocations ahead of time, prioritizing ahead of time what you're going to need, when and how you're going to use the money. Each dollar has like its own little arms and legs, its own little purpose. And if you have a purpose for every dollar, some of them, are going to end up as savings for later. Some of them are going to be for a goal that you have soon. And some of it you're going to need right now for your ongoing expenses. So every dollar has a purpose. It's for now, soon, or later. And when you allocate that and ahead of time, how many dollars need to go in each one of those buckets or accounts or each purpose, it's so much easier. It's not a stressor. For some people, they get a paycheck and they get stressed out. Well,
Mhm.
how am I going to make it stretch? Well, if you have a plan, then and if there's any gaps, don't you want to know that before it happens instead of after? It's like, well, I can't finish my housing payment or my mortgage payment now because these things showed up and I wasn't ready. And now I've got to put a balance on a credit card, or I've got to borrow from my entertainment fund, because I'm short. And there's nothing worse than running out of money before you run out of month. Nothing worse than that. It's a terrible feeling.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of you listening, a lot of you watching may be in that situation where it just keeps happening. Like you're spinning, you're spinning. It's like, I've been here before. I'm short again. So how do you fix that? And a lot of that starts with just being real with where you are. If you're in a marriage or relationship where you're sharing money, there's other people involved in your finances and your financial decisions. You want to have honest conversations. And I don't mean honest conversations like you spend too much, you don't make enough, those kind of conversations, the blame shame thing. But just honest conversations about what can we do from here. I've got a 3-point system that works so well. It's, simple, but not easy, but it helps people get from here to there when there's not enough money to do the things the money needs to do at your house. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, and I appreciate also you bringing up the fact that, I mean, part of the initial discussions are usually the blame shame, right? You don't want to have that discussion because,
Mhm.
oh, I already know what they're going to say, and I already know that I'm the spender, and I this and I that, and that. And we've talked about on other shows that need for communication is huge and it's important, especially moving forward, especially if you're married or you're going to be married, all that stuff too. So, folks, I encourage you guys to definitely look at back at some of our shows where Judy has discussed, that the blame shame, the communication piece. How do we get past that to have that initial conversation? So, with that said, let me kind of jump in and welcome folks again to our show. We're here every Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock, and I want to make sure you guys also are aware, if you're not following Judy, that you follow Judy at judycopenbarger.com. All of her social media platforms are there. And I want to take a moment to talk about judycopenbarger.com. Share with folks what's there, what can they expect, that free word that's in there too. So
The free stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
the free
So
stuff.
it's awesome. It's judycopenbarger.com. There's all kinds of free videos you can watch and articles, obviously, but there's also access through the portal on the judycopenbarger.com site that gets you to the Money, Truth, and Life online mastery program. And that program is designed for these 5 pillars that covers the legal, the insurances, the taxation, the cash flows and reserves, and investments in detail. So everything down to what's the difference between a stock and a bond? And how do I know how much of each I should have, if any? And what about permanent or temporary life insurance? What's really best for me and my family? And do I need it at all? And if I do, how much? How much would be too much? What should I be spending for things like that? Wills and trusts and 401ks and all of these things that you kind of hear about. A lot of these things you may be participating in or have participated in, but you didn't really know. You just kind of check the boxes and sign the papers when they said to, and you're not really sure what it is. Or maybe you've had bad information from um, people trying to sell you something. I have so many people that say their experience hasn't been good with insurance products or investment products or real estate transactions because there's someone on the other side of the transaction that's pushing because their commission is based on what you do, the decision you make or the money you spend or what you buy. And so there's kind of a natural conflict of interest built into some of those informational sessions that you have. So the information sometimes cannot be totally just objective. So people will share those experiences with me, and I always feel bad. And so part of the reason I designed the Money, Truth, and Life online mastery program is to have a really good objective source. Nobody's selling you anything. I don't have anything for you, right? Other than valuable information. So I don't have anything to sell you. I'm not trying to do anything to you or keep you from doing anything or get you to leave your advisors or your banker. It's just good information. So really you'll go into a meeting with your attorney, with your accountant, with your investment advisor, with your 401k provider. You'll go into those meetings with a really good base of information upon which you can make decisions and upon which you can ask the right questions. Because sometimes you don't even know where to start. You don't even have a foundation. And this experience, this education, these courses and classes, you can take just one class or any course that you want. They're designed for you to learn what you need to learn to get you to the next level. Whether you're just starting out, just married, just out of college, or if you've been doing this a long time and you just don't want to spin anymore and make the same mistakes. And maybe you've never made a detrimental financial mistake, but you don't feel like you're getting there fast enough. It just feels like, oh, it's not fast enough. It'll help optimize wherever you are and get you to that next level. So that's why I designed it. That's why it's there. And I hope you'll take advantage of it.
And I think it's also is to say this is also part of what you created for a legacy. Also, the sharing of your wisdom. And folks, if you're joining us for the first time, we like having fun on this show, but at the end of the day, Judy is sharing her wisdom, things that she's done over the years. And again, it's not that, like you just said, you're not here to sell anything. You're not here to get new clients. It's just to make folks aware of options. I think that's what it really comes down to, because sometimes, let's face it, right? When you deal with finance, it's a very scary word, especially if you don't know what you're doing, right? You've been taught a certain way with your parents. And unfortunately, a lot of our parents growing up didn't have that background or didn't know any better, for a lot of things like that. So it's important that when you're looking at this, we've talked about the 4-H's before too, and we'll touch on that a little bit, but I just want folks to know that you're the real deal on there. Although we laugh, we have fun in this show, but everything that Judy is saying is very accurate. This is from a lot of years of experience, and it's just, we don't want to fall, or make the same mistakes that a lot of folks have done, right? So speaking of mistakes, right? I want you to take a moment and I want you to think of a client, someone, whether recently or somebody that stood out there that came to you. And I'm sure you have these folks where they're just in tears, like they don't know what to do, right? Either they lost money or they're coming into money, but it's that overwhelming feeling that, like you just said, if you don't have somebody that you can trust, how did you get them through that? And kind of like, what was the scenario?
Yeah, a couple come to mind. One, and it's a pattern. I've got faces in front of me in my office right now in my mind's eye that I'm remembering, that has to do with a fear of investing. And then I have another one that made a mistake. And again, it represents probably 50 people that I dealt with, a decade or so ago when we had the implosion, the perfect storm financially, of having too much real estate. When you could just get a loan, they pass them out like candy, and you could say whatever you wanted on paper. Yeah, I make $800,000 a year, no problem. I don't have any expenses, and it's all good. Okay, here's a loan. Here's more money. So go below that too. So many people over leveraged. And I had one couple in particular that came in and they had, I believe, 7, maybe 8 properties at the time, barely making the payments with the tenants' money, which, is fine if you have the cash reserves in the background, in your back pocket. Because what if somebody moves out? What if they move out and there's some destruction or damage to the property? And now where are you going to get the money to fix that? Credit card. Okay. Well, now your payments every month are bigger than they were, and you barely made it before. And so you kind of borrow, from Peter to pay Paul and do that for a while. And then you put money on credit card for a while and it's going to turn around. And then you put more money on a credit card and then it just implodes. And we saw that happen to a lot of people. And one couple in particular had that happen. Probably 10 years later, which 5 or 6 years ago, they had an opportunity to do that again. But they had a lane, they had a margin, they had a plan of exactly how much they needed in capital to capitalize and back up that investment plan. And so when things happened, and they did, they always will, they had the money to take care of what needed to happen and not went down that same path. So, and they're acquiring more properties again. They're probably at 6 now. And so they're going to get back to where they were, but now they're building it the right way with the right foundation and the right basic principles. So that's one couple, they got it wrong one time, then we got acquainted, and now they're doing it the right way. They've got a plan. And then the other couple was one that came in and they had very high income. They've been clients now for a long time, but they had very high income, both do really well at their jobs, top in their industries, very, very successful. They're in San Diego area. And when they came in, they had a lot of money in savings, like hundreds and hundreds of thousands in savings, which to me is a lot of money. For most people, it's like, wow, that'd be great, right? So you'd be your own bank. But they really had a fear of investing. They'd never done it. They didn't understand it. They came from families that had some money, but it was all in banking and then, real estate a little bit. But you just accumulate money, and then they weren't putting Mr. Money to work. So basically, when we went through the economics of it, we went through the facts of the value of that money and the opportunity risk that they had with that money. They were actually losing to inflation, and inflation wasn't even that high then, like it is now. I relatively high, and so they were kind of going backwards. And so when they started to understand some of these basic concepts that are in the Money, Truth, and Life program, they started to understand how it really works, how money really moves, the value of having it, the cash is king principle, right? So you have the cash, but now you put it to work. They started to get a little bit more comfortable with putting money in retirement programs and into different investment structures and vehicles. And they've done so well. It's just the trajectory has changed everything over the last number of years for them. But it's one of those things where, you're making these mistakes kind of by default because you just don't know. And that's something that I've seen over the last 40 years or so of doing this. Don't tell anybody, but I've been at this a little while. But when you really understand some of the basic principles, you know better, you do better. And that's really my goal as part of my legacy you mentioned is to leave behind some of these principles and just basic nuggets of knowledge. It's like, oh, nobody ever explained it that way. I never understood that. And now that I know it, it's kind of like if you sit down to play a game, Monopoly, any game, when you know the rules, you play it better, right? It's like tax. When you know the rules, you can play that game better.
Huh?
So it's important to have a good tax person or a good tax firm help you, and not just always go, try to save the few $100 it costs, and sometimes more than that. But sometimes it's like penny wise, dollar foolish. I think a good accountant for most people is well advised and worth the money.
So speaking of advices, I think we come to the portion of our show, our favorite portion of the show, and you know what that is, right? All right, Judy, tell us what you got for this week.
All right, here is your challenge. Look at your cash flows and cash reserves. And just really sit down, maybe with a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, take a couple minutes and write down what you think might be a gap, something that you could do more, better, different in the area of cash flows and reserves. The second thing is shorten that list down to an action item or two that you could do this week. And the third thing, like Nike, just do it. Take action. Maybe you need to open a savings account that is not one that you drive by that bank, twice a day on your way to and from work. It's too accessible. And you put savings in and then you raided the account, and then you put savings in and then you raid the account. So you might need to open an account that's not so accessible. Maybe it doesn't even have an ATM card, and savings really becomes savings. Maybe there's something you can do at work, sign up with your HR or your payroll person to put a little bit more in your 401k or your 457 or your 403b at work. Just save a little bit more. If there are any costs that you can cut, I've got a great 3-part exercise you can look at. And it's just a matter, if you have more month than money, it's just a matter of 3 things, simple but not easy. It's either make more, spend less, or save something. And it's a wonderful exercise that you can do if you're in a marriage or you're making decisions together with other people. Do it separately, and then come together with your list of things that you can do. And it's so simple and practical, but it is revolutionary. It's just a new perspective, a new way of thinking of something maybe you've never thought of before. And all of a sudden the cash flows show up. And I think the last thing in this challenge is get your mindset right. If you believe you can't do it, you're going to be right. If you believe you can do it, you're going to be right. So get your mindset right. If you've never really felt confident about money things and cash things and having savings, you always felt like there was lack, just flip your mindset. And it's amazing how far that will go to get you where you want to be. That's your
All right, folks,
challenge.
there's your challenge. You've heard it. So make sure you share that with us. Also, I want to make sure that I welcome and folks that are just joining us, make sure that you guys watch the beginning of the show. We did talk about quite a bit about cash flows and reserves. And if you're not following Judy, please do so at judycopenbarger.com. All of her social media accounts are on there. So make sure that you follow her, tag her. And we'd love to hear from you guys, questions and different things that come up during the week as well too. Judy, as always, a pleasure. I always look forward to our Tuesday morning shows. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you as well. Have a blessed week. Bye-bye.